Hello, those of you who are here already. We are going to start right at 7 o'clock as usual. Hi everybody, welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. My name's Maria, and I'm here to help you make more quilts in less time with a lot less stress. So today, we're going to start with a little bit of a history lesson as our tip. Back during World War I and World War II, the concept of rationing came into play here in the US, and the idea of having more stuff than you were supposed to have or you had to have was looked down upon. So there were signs that used to be up that said that hoarding helps Hitler, and you were encouraged to do things like not wear silk stockings so that they would have the silk for parachutes, and things like that, which was preserve, conserve, and reuse stuff as much as possible. So there was a phrase that was on a lot of signage out there, and it kind of became mantras for a lot of families. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. Sorry, that last finger didn't want to work right. So there were those four things. And a lot of times these days, I'm finding that people just find it easier to throw things away and get a new one than to either repair or to reuse in other ways stuff that they have in their home. And I'm not saying that it's evil or anything like that, don't get me wrong. I am trying to get away from fast fashion for a couple of reasons, and we can go into that on a later talk if you'd like. But as a general rule, I prefer to reuse as much as possible, etc. So I'm just, all of a sudden my screen went weird. Here we go, okay. So I'm very much into reusing things, repurposing things. So it's not uncommon for there to be a relatively high percentage of the quilts that I make to have repurposed fabric. Usually from my own stuff. I don't tend to thrift buy just to repurpose the fabric, but I do know people who do. I also try to make sure to use as much of it as I possibly can. So going into 2023, I'd like you to consider a couple of changes to the buying habits that you may have. And the first one being to try not to purchase things just because it's the newer version. It's kind of like the early adapters who are online for days before the new iPhone comes out, even though they have the most recent version, and they still don't understand how most of its features work, and they don't need the features that the old one has. And it works perfectly fine, but they have to have the new one the day it comes out. I'd like you to consider, what do I really need, and do I have things already that fill that need? So, just a thought. I'm just trying to put that out there into the universe, that maybe that's going to be our decluttering tip. Now, this can include things like natural decluttering. And it's not reusing your plants. Natural decluttering means, okay, I've decided I don't want to use this product. Maybe it's a shampoo, a dish soap, a laundry soap, because I found something I like better. Natural decluttering would mean I am going to make a conscious effort to use this stuff up that I didn't like as well but was perfectly fine. And then when it's gone, I will only purchase the newer type that I like better. So a lot of times I'll go into somebody's house and there will be an under cabinet, usually under the sink in the kitchen, that's just chock-a-block full of cleaning materials, and they very rarely clean using any of them. Or they might have, a bottle of Lysol or Windex or something like that, or another brand of the same kind of thing, that they use all the time, but there's 5 more bottles of other things in the back that they don't use. If you have items you will not use at all, it might be worth, reaching out to some of your local charitable institutions to see if they could use them. So, for example, there is a church that I can, as a professional organizer, take things like laundry soap, dryer sheets, and things like that, even if the bottles are open, And I can, instead of throwing it out, give it to them. And then they will use those things to launder either clothes or blankets or things like that for those that are unhomed. So it's a nice little thing that I can do for them, and I can't return it. It's open, and otherwise I have to throw it away in the trash. So if you don't want to use it, try to find some place that will. Now there are some things, for example, silver polish or brass polish, that homeless shelters really don't need. That's just one of those things that'll be harder to get rid of. But, any sort of a cleanser. The one client had a ton of those magic erasers for cleaning, but then she hired a maid service that comes in every week. She never touches them. Give them to a place that'll use them. Maybe your church would like to have some of those for cleaning up, and that saves the church the money. If you belong to a temple, maybe they need gardening supplies, weed blocker or herbicides or whatever it is. See if you can find a place to donate it to that will use it up versus you either taking it to hazmat collection or to just throwing it away in the trash. Okay? So that's our tip for the week. So what I'm going to do is do some updates on the stuff that we've been talking about, kind of let you know where I am standing with things, and then we'll go on from there. Okay? So the Twisted 4-Patch, which was our 2022 quilt, I have not completely finished it because the binding and label are not on. But I'd like to show you where we are at this point. I've applied the binding to the one side onto the back, and this is a striped binding. Let me see if you can see how this looks. I have to change views here real quick. Okay, so what I did is I took 1-inch strips, we've talked about this in the past, and I made this binding. It's a bias binding. Okay, and so you can see it in a little bit bigger view here. I sewed it the normal way onto the back of the quilt. Now normally you put your binding on the front and then you wrap it around to the back. But because of what I did, I put it on the back first. And I did do the mitered corners. Then I wrapped it to the front, and I am hand stitching it on the front. And the reason that it went on the back first is because I gave it a little flange here. So this is how my outer border and binding look now. So I took the quilt that you've seen a bunch of times. I'm hoping that you're not getting too much noise from the fabric against the mic. Then I put this black border on. We talked about last time how my backing wasn't long enough, so I had to add a black binding, a black border on the back as well. And then I put the binding on. So at this point, I'm just wrapping it over. This is where I started. So I went around the corner. This is where I started. I went around the corner and then I did this whole side. I'm about half done with that. But I have a small, like half a dozen, commission quilts that I'm working on. And I told people I needed decisions by these dates in order for them to have these for Christmas. And I didn't get the decisions by those dates. So what I'm trying to do is, if possible, what I like to do is get the top done and stay stitched so that they can at least have that. They can give that with the IOU for the quilting, and then they can take it to a long armor, maybe near where they are. It doesn't have to be me. So they can take it and have it finished. And I'll provide the backing and all of that. I just won't provide the batting. But I have the binding made and everything ready to go for them, and so they can have that done at a relatively inexpensive price, or the person who's giving it to them can have it done either here or where they are. Sometimes my commissions come from out of state, so I like to be able to give them that option. So the last couple of weeks I've been getting those tops finished. If you were here before we started, you probably heard me saying that doesn't look right. I'm piecing 3 tops right now, and I was putting everything I have gets pinned, as you know, so that I don't mess up. And I was putting these pieces on, and I looked at them, and I'm like, that doesn't look right. Well, because I was thinking of one of the other quilts. So I had the right pieces, and I was doing it the right way. But, yeah, it was one of those, uh-oh, did I just mess up moments? And we all have them. So, that's why this binding didn't get finished being put on. But, I thought it was something you should see. It will be done before 2023, because this is our 2022 quilt. I will say that I did it a little bit differently. I could have just done a regular binding, but I wanted it to be flanged. And one of the reasons for that is, so this is the binding, the way I made it. Just this is very flexible, and it could have really stretched, which would have led to points of failure on a binding if it was just the sewn together pieces. So what I wanted to do was to make sure that on the inside I had a solid piece to add extra structure without adding the extra flex. Because if I had just done a double fold binding with this, I'd have had a lot of seams just jamming up against themselves as everything folded back on itself multiple times. So by doing a solid second piece, when this gets rolled over, you can see there's this extra here, okay? Hold on, let me see if I can put this here so you can see it better. So I lined those two up, okay? And that gave me this extra bit here on the edge, and that's the flange. Now, the inside of my binding is all solid now, so I have that additional structure to make my binding last longer. If I had just done the strips, that would have been cool, but I wouldn't have had that added ability. Now, I could have made the two pieces exactly the same size, but as you're putting on binding, especially around the corners, it can be really hard sometimes to make sure that that's perfect. And so by making it a flange, sometimes my flange is a tiny bit wider and sometimes it's a tiny bit narrower because of all the seaming going on. And because these fabrics are not all exactly the same thickness, density, I wound up with a little bit more or less give. So I went ahead and I did it this way, and I love how it turned out. I have extra here. So what am I going to do with it? I'm going to save it. And I will probably make more. Maybe not with the red. Maybe with the red, I don't know. But on a kid's quilt, that would be fun to go ahead and put the striped binding on the edge with that extra heft. And it wouldn't matter if some of it had a red flange and some of it had a yellow flange. You know, it could be a lot of fun. So let's backtrack a little. I am currently, here's my clips, putting the binding on the actual top edge. I started on the bottom because that's where I joined my strips together, my binding strips at the end. So I wanted to make sure that that laid flat. So here's that black strip that I added. This is my sleeve. So even though I added that strip, this is the end here is the only place you're going to see it. And once this gets wrapped around, nobody's going to care that this black strip, sorry, right here. This black strip is here. This is because these two pieces, this plaid and this pink, were too short to add the extra 2 inches on that I wanted to add. I wanted the black border, if this is your first time looking at this, because I had so many edges here that were discombobulated. I didn't want to add the stripe binding next to the twisted 4-patch. And here, let me stand up so you can see this better. Because I thought they'd get lost, or the 4 patches might be harder to see. So this should give you an idea. Okay? Hopefully, again, I'm not banging up against the mic too much. So you can probably imagine that if the stripe was right here up against this edge, then like right here, it would not line up perfectly because these are all randomly cut right through here. So it would go off at weird angles compared to the blocks. So I wanted to make sure that I put this buffer in for the visual. And while I could have put on a black flange that would have looked exactly the same and you wouldn't have noticed it as much, I thought the red added a nice little pop of color. So this is the Twisted 4 patch. So this is our 2022 quilt, and it will be done in 2022. So I will show it to you in January if you would like to see it completely finished. So that brings me to the 2023 quilt. All right, let me just get this in a way that I can toss it over here on the chair. So last time I gave you several choices as to what our 2023 quilt was going to be. And I was rather surprised. I have a few of you who regularly email me based on the live stream. Plus, I do have Judy in particular who tends to comment on the chat, and I noticed that there's one here. So that everybody picked the same option out of the 5, and everybody picked a mystery quilt. So that's what we're going to do. If this is your first time here, and you would like to send me an email, the top of this is missing, but on this side, sorry, it's mail, M-A-I-L, at StashBlasterQuilts.com. So, Judy, that's where I'd like you to go ahead and send your picture. But if you want to send me photos, if you have questions, if you have comments that you don't want to leave in the chat, you're always welcome to leave things in the chat. But if there's something in particular that you'd like to ask me about, either organizationally or quilting related, or you'd like me to look at photos to maybe give you color suggestions, or if you have a problem that we can address it, that's where you send it, is mail at StashBlasterQuilts.com. And then, so anyway, so you all chose mystery. So you only get one more choice, okay? Because I'll be coming up with a mystery. I can't let you in on the design phase like I did with the Twisted 4 patch. So your choice are these right here. What size quilt would you like me to design? I could do a fairly small table topper. So if you've got a bunch on your plates right now and you'd like a small project, I can do that. I can do a wall hanging. I can do a crib size, a lap size, or a bed size. So go ahead. This is your last vote. Our next, hold on, let me just double check this real quick. I just want to double check when our next live stream is going to be. It's going to be the January the 4th, which is the first Wednesday of the month. Oh, hold on. I lost it here. There we go. So you have until then to go ahead and place your vote for any of these here. The table topper, the wall hanging, crib, lap, or bed size. And so once I have that, I'm going to be designing. And in fact, because it's the mystery and you're not going to be taking a bunch of votes along the way, I think I'm going to be able to start on that during the next couple weeks. Start some basic designing. What's the main block going to be, or blocks? Haven't decided yet. How do I want these things to work out? So I'm going to go ahead and get started, but I do need to have a size so that I can go ahead and finalize a design and then get you the instructions and all of that. I'm going to be trying to, because you know me in tech, I am going to be attempting to put another window on the website, StashBlasterQuilts.com, that will have the annual quilt. And so I'll put some information up about the Twisted 4 patch, but that's where I'm going to put things like, okay, here's your fabric requirements, here was step 1, here was step 2, da 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 da. So if you missed anything from before, you don't have to try to find it on the past live streams. But during the live streams, I'm going to be doing the parts that I'm telling you about. So if there's anything you're not 100% sure on, you can kind of do it along with me, and then ask any questions you have in the chat. So, excuse me. So I hope that works for you. If you have any other suggestions as to what you think might work better, I know there's a million different ways that people do challenge quilts. Most of them are just printed instructions somewhere, and maybe some pre-recorded instructions and demos, but I'd like to kind of do the stuff right in front of you so that if I mess up, you'll know and you can see what I have to do to fix it, which could be going ahead and picking it all out and redoing it, or it might be, hey, that's kind of cool, let's leave it like that. So you'll get to see all of that happen. And then, I tend to have a couple of different ways that I do things. So I'll probably demonstrate more than one if there's, more than one way to do the step that we're looking at. So that's the 2023 quilt. It's going to be a mystery. And the goal will be, for me, and it's up to you whether you want to keep the timeline with me or if you even want to do it, my goal will, again, just like the 2022, would be to have it done and bound by the end of 2023. Okay? So that's the pace that I'm going to pick for doing the different parts of this. So right up front, there's going to be getting the fabric, doing the cutting, so that there's enough time to sew, assemble, quilt, bind, etc. So that's my plan. Okay, so some other stuff. So there's an old saying that man plans and God laughs. So I was reading the QU Digest. Now, QU is the umbrella organization for the two guilds I belong to, the chapters. So I belong to Quilters Unlimited Springfield and Centerville. And so there is this wonderful lady who runs a digest so that anyone from QU can put on there that they have a dresser for sale, or they have this sewing machine, or they have whatever it is, and they can offer it up to the other guild members. So this person advertised that she had a sit-down quilting machine. Well, I don't have one of those, so I do all of my quilting, and I do a lot of bed-size quilts on my standard machine. So I said, okay, let me find out what she wants for this, because it's an older machine, and it comes on a big table and wings that go up. This is not the kind of long arm you tend to see people using with the rails where you don't have to do basting. This is one where the quilt sandwich would have to be made first, just as if I was either hand quilting it or doing it on my standard. But it faces you the way a regular quilting machine does. So instead of going this way, it goes this way. And it had this giant table so that there'd be more room to move things around. It's strictly for quilting. So she and I were going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and she said to me, okay, look, if you will get it out of the basement, I will give it to you. It's like, oh, this is cool. So I arranged with a couple of guys who could come, but first I wanted to test the machine, of course, and she was 100% on that. So yesterday she went to check out the machine and make sure it worked, and it didn't work. So she emailed me and said, we're going to have to cancel, because I was supposed to go today, this morning. And she said, we have to cancel for tomorrow. I'm not going to be able to do it. It's like, oh. So I'm hoping that she can figure out what was wrong with it, and maybe it'll work, and maybe I could still do it. But, I was gonna pay the guys who were going to help me like $100, and that was going to be the cheapest quilting machine, and I had the spot made in the basement for it and everything. It's just like, oh, it's been that kind of week. But that's another one of those advantages to belonging to a guild, because you never know when somebody has something like that you would like, which it's so much better to just wind up in a junk heap somewhere or donated to a thrift store who would have no idea what this was. It just looks like a giant sewing machine that's fused into this giant table. Who would want something like that? Me. And so they would probably just junk it. So, that's another one of those things like I was talking about earlier with the whole, let's reuse it. Let's give it to somebody who will use it. So that's another one that I'd like you to consider. If you don't want something, then give it to somebody who does. Okay, the Hexi quilt. It is not on the wall. It is on big styrofoam design walls that I have downstairs, because I needed some of the design wall space up here to do other things. Plus, I was moving these walls around a lot lately in order to finish those consignment quilts I was telling you about. So they're down there. I haven't finished the rows, but I have some nice big fat chunks done. So I am going to, as I get rows put together, and I'm not talking just one hex rows. I'm talking like rows this big. Once I have those put together, then they're going to come back up on the wall, and you'll see big chunks going up at a time. But again, I haven't had a whole lot of time to work on it. I'm still trying to do my 15 seams a day, but because of the Twisted 4 patch, I've missed the last couple of days. I'm also going to have a house full, so pretty much the next couple of weeks, I'm not going to get a ton done. I'm going to be working on the consignment stuff. I'm going to be doing my regular business stuff. So I'm not going to gain a lot of ground by the time I see you next. I'm hoping to be further along on the mystery quilt, and just about ready, maybe not for January 4th, but by the next one I will hope to have the design complete and possibly the fabric requirements done. So you have time to get the fabric, pre-wash if you want to pre-wash, etc. So my goal is that no later than February we're cutting and starting to sew. So that's the plan. So anyways, the Hexi quilt. The charm quilt is kind of stalled at the moment. I do have my 60-degree triangles into diamonds now, but I cannot, because I've got stuff blocking the way, get to my template plastic, and I want to make sure that I have my points marked properly so that I can line them up for sewing. So once I can make a template out of cardboard or whatever I can do over the next couple weeks, then I'll be able to mark those and start sewing them. But what I have been doing is working on the pieces on the back, because it's a little less important that it get lined up perfectly. So let me show you what I'm doing. I had originally planned on just doing diamonds to create larger diamonds, but because on the back I'm using the split, let's see if you can see this. Hold on, I need to change my view. I'm doing the split ones. I'm going to lay them out instead of just where they line up like this and then have all the horizontal seams. I'm lining them in hexagons so that it's more of a spinny look to it. So I'm trying to get all the parts figured out in terms of how many hexes, half hexes, quarter hexes. What do I need in order to make that diamond shape that I want? The diamond looks wonky because some of it's been sewn together and then some of the pieces haven't. So like these are half hexes here. So all these seam allowances have already been taken up, which is why it doesn't take up as much space as the same 6 triangles would. So that's what I'm doing with that. Alright, back over here to me. Gotta move the camera over and then down. Oh, okay, good. Okay. Oh, so one of the things I meant to mention with the sewing machine is, so because I was going to be testing a new sewing machine that I hadn't used before, I also this week took some squares that I got off of a free table at my guild, and I made this top. Yeah, here we go. And so I made the quilt sandwich so I could test out that sewing machine. So it was another thing that slowed me down the last week. Okay, so that's the update on the quilts. So in doing this, this was sort of a way to use up scraps from the charm quilt, okay? So I had started with 5-inch squares, and I knew I was going to cut a 4.5-inch 60-degree triangle out of each of those squares. And I said to myself, that's going to leave two very oddly shaped pieces, because it would be most of a triangle, and then when it meets at the point, it would be straight. So it would go across like this, and then up at an angle, and then go up a little bit. So kind of a trapezoidal shape with a really long nose, if you want to think about it that way. So I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I took the squares and I sewed down the sides. Then I cut the triangles out. This left me with two of those funky shapes. But basically that forms a 60-degree triangle because the 30 from each of those two halves comes together and it's a 60. So I had two more 60-degree triangles out of each pair that I cut. But they were split in half. So they don't qualify for the charm quilt, because a charm quilt you can only have one of each fabric. So I said, okay, I could have cut the same 4.5-inch triangles and then had the front and the back be either the whole triangles or the splits. But I decided to cut them down further to 3.5s. And then each of these diamonds that I just showed you, I'm going to have a black border around, I think. I'm not sure exactly what kind of border I'm going to have yet. But the ones on the back are smaller. So I'm going to need some sort of a border, but that border is going to give me the flexibility that if it's not perfectly aligned, no one will ever know, except for hopefully the thousands and millions of you who watch this video at some point. So when I was doing that, since I was cutting these pieces that were 3.5 instead of 4.5, and there was already extra at the top, I wound up with pieces that looked like this, sort of. Okay? So the corners were cut off, and it's kind of a squat shape. And I had two of each. So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to sew those two pairs into 4 patches. Just like I sew 4 patches all the time. So this is a 4 patch that I made out of that. Here's the thing though. In order to cut the 3.5-inch 60-degree triangles and to make sure that they laid super flat at the point, because that's one of the triangle edges is going to be right in that point, I pressed with the seams open. Now I normally do my 4 patches, press to the side, and then I spin the centers. If you don't know how to do that, let me know. I've talked about it here before, but you'd have to go through a whole bunch of lives to see it. So we can certainly talk about it. Now since I pressed these seams open, when I sewed the 4 patch, I'm pressing these seams open. If you were to press these to the side, you would still get a fairly large hump. And for quilting, that's a real pain. So in order to keep it flatter, this is going to be best if I have it pressed open. Now, since I don't do this on a regular basis, I have 2 choices when these are done. I can either put them away in a box for the next time I have 4 patches or whatever that are pressed open, or another design where I've pressed seams such that open pressed 4 patches would be helpful. Or I can take all of these that I have, which are I think 225 of them, and put them into a quilt all by themselves. And right now I'm not sure which I'm going to do. A lot's going to depend on the time I have. Now, these are obviously rectangles, not squares. I'm going to leave them like this until it's time to trim them down. Because why spend time cutting them down now if I might need to cut them down further in the future? Or I might decide to just straighten them out because of these odd angles here. I might just turn them into rectangles and use them that way. So since I don't know what I'm going to do with these yet, I'm going to set them aside in their own box because of the pressing. They're not going to go in my regular 4-patch drawers. But I will have these for another project rather than throwing away all this material. Okay. Now, I've talked to you about not wasting. Okay? And so one of the things that I do quite a bit is what I call chip blocks. I started calling them chip blocks long before crumbs came out as a title for quilts. I was talking with Bonnie Hunter when she came to Centerville one year, and I was doing her workshop, and I was walking around and emptying everybody's trash into a big Ziploc bag at the end after they all left. And she asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I'm going to sew these into blocks. And we're talking little tiny scraps. And she said to me, well, what are you going to, how, do you do miniatures? I'm like, no, I sew them all together into big blocks, and then I use those blocks as components of other blocks. And so the crumb concept started as far as I knew. You know, people may have been doing this forever, but I didn't know. So to give you an example, this is a chip block. Okay? And these pieces are all really small because I keep 1-inch squares as squares. So these are all pieces that were less than 1 inch wide. Okay? And so these are really small, but what's nice is that once you build up to a certain size, now this is a little square, and I did stay stitch the edges just so it would stay together. But if you were doing, let's say, the 5-square method of flying geese, and you substituted this as one of the squares, then you could have either the center of your flying goose. Now obviously a bigger size square would be better. But this could be either the center, or this could be the wings on each side. And that could add, and I think does add, a lot of character to a quilt, because this is a fabric that no one will ever have in their quilts, because I made it out of stuff that I already had. It's very easy to do this. Doing it on old phone books works great if you can find them, because the paper's super thin and then tears off really easy. But one thing I got from Karen Brown when I was watching Just Get It Done Quilts is that she uses calculator paper. Okay? And so she puts fabric on that. And you just build it from the center. So you'll take one piece and you put it in the middle, and then you just take another scrap and you put it next to it, and you just keep working your way out in both directions. The reason you start in the center and work out is because then you can have 2 on each strip and get a whole stack of them, and then you press them all at once, and that way you're not going to the iron every 2 seconds. And you're not cutting them out of the machine. So what she does is I don't remember what size her tape is. Mine's kind of a weird size. So she will take hers, I think hers is exactly 2 inches across or some such. So she makes sure she has at least 1/4 inch that hangs out past, so that she can have the trim it to 1/4 inch around, and then she'll have the 2 inch by whatever length that she's cut her strips for blocks. Okay? But mine are really weird, like 2 3/8 or something like that. It's not a size that would easily get sewn in anyway. And a lot of the strips I have are short like these guys. So as long as it covers the paper, I'm good. I'll trim it down to whatever size I'm going to need for my project. But what do I do with the strips or chunks that are too small to do that with? Well, I'll sew them together first and then put them on the strip. So here's one. I'm folding this down. I had sewn a couple of these together here, and they were still too short for the paper, so I just added a couple more little scraps that I had, and then I sewed it on to the paper here, and then I'll just put another strip across, and it'll be fine. So some of them might go this way, some of them might go this way, some of them might go at a weird angle. It doesn't matter, because by the time I get to the end, I will have a 12.5-inch strip by whatever length, whatever width I decide to use. If I had significantly longer pieces, then I might go ahead and either let them extend off the edge or just use the phone books again, because those you can put wider pieces on, and that works fine. If you have really long strips, then you can always do a string quilt if they're wide enough. So, there's lots of ways to use those tag ends. And my thing is that fabric is not cheap, either for the wallet or the environment. Okay, making a fabric is not environmentally friendly. It's not as bad as some things, but there's a lot that goes into it that's not really great. So we should use every bit of it. Plus, for the wallet, I paid as much per square inch for the stuff I'm throwing away as what I put into the quilt. And so if I spend, let's say, $10 a yard for material, but I really only use 3/4 of that, and I throw out the other quarter because it's in little chunks and pieces like that, then I've still spent the same amount on that quilt as the full price for that fabric. It's practically free fabric now. Anything you didn't use for the quilt, if you would have thrown it away but you now use it, it's basically free because it's already gone into your calculations for the cost of quilt number 1, the big one. So I think that use it up, give it all for charity if you want to. A lot of my scraps just become charity quilts. There are times that I'll dive in because I'm doing something that's maybe an analogous color scheme, and so I need 40 shades of blue. Well, I've already got some pre-cut, so I can start with that, which means I have to dig into my yardage less, either my fat quarters or my full yardage pieces, so that I have those bigger sizes available at a later date if I need it. So I will do something like that if I can raid the sizes I need out of my drawers first from my pre-cut stuff, and then I go and I start pulling out fat quarters and yardage from the wall to complete whatever it is that I need to do. I much prefer to see fabric on my yardage wall than in my drawers, just because I know I've got more going on here, and I can also see everything a lot easier because this is all color sorted. In my drawers it's not, so it takes me a little bit longer going through the drawers to find all those shades of blue, but it's already pressed, it's already cut, it's already ready to go, so that's not so bad either. So don't think badly about that. Okay. So the diagonal binding that I made, these are the pieces that are too small. For my flanged binding, my stripe had to be 1 1/4 inches, and my red was 1 3/4 inches. So that's the size widths I had for the stripe. So this is too small. This is less than 1 1/4 inches. But there's no reason why I couldn't take this and sew it onto this. Okay. And now I've got something extra funky going on in the middle. Nothing wrong with that. So even though this is pre-sewn and these strips are too small to really do anything with except for press them and then cut them into 1-inch squares, which I already have at least 5,000 of, I can leave these assembled and just take out a chunk, and then it'll get straightened out when the next piece goes on, trimmed off, and it's ready to go. And that means that my improvised stripe that goes across a quilt, maybe in a row by row, is going to have extra interest because there's going to be some oddly angled pieces in there, which is kind of fun. Okay, next on my list. So, I told you that I belong to the guilds. And so, Centerville's doing the charm challenge I told you about. Well, Springfield, for the holiday party, was doing a mug rug exchange. And I won the mug rug exchange totally. I got really lucky here, because number one, I didn't have time to make a mug rug. But some people made extras, and so somebody gave me one that I got to put into the exchange. So that was amazing, because that meant that I got to play the game, and since I didn't have time between business and everything else to make the mug rug, I was just going to watch, but it worked out very nicely for me. And I won this mug rug. So on this side, on this red side, somebody embroidered, "My soul is fed with needle and thread." And then this little charm says, "She believed she could, so she did." And then on the back side, it says, "May your bobbin always be full." And it's got a little bee charm here. Isn't that adorable? I don't know who made it. I just know it was the one that had the bright number sticker on it. So if you happen to be watching, and if you happened to make this, thank you very much. This is lovely. It's wonderful, and I will use it, I promise. It's going to be out on my end table where my bonus mom will be most likely sitting during her visit here next Thursday through the New Year. So this is going to get appreciated by a bunch of people, because I'm going to have a bunch of people over, so it's going to be on display. So whoever you are, thank you very much. This was amazing. Quite a few of the quilters in the guild do embroidery stuff, so that's just an extra skill. I don't have a machine that can do it, and so if I was doing this by hand, I would still be doing it next year. So so this was wonderful, and so I thought I would share that with you because it was super cool. Okay, now the last thing I have here for the moment is the AARP magazine, December 2022 to January 2023. It has Helen Mir in here on the front. And then it says up here, "I recluttered my home and you should too." So I thought I would tell you about this article. You've probably heard about minimalism. There are people who are extraordinarily proud of how few items they own. So on some minimalists' sites, they will say things like, "I own 104 items and each shoe counts as one." So if you have a pair of shoes, that's 2 items. And so they track and they count their items, and they're very proud on how few items they have that they live with. Now, for some, it's just a challenge. For some, the idea is that if you have less stuff and you spend less money on things, then you have more of an ability to have money to spend on activities. So experiences and goings and doings and generosity and charity and things like that, because you haven't wasted your money on junk, which is the way they look at it. So the KonMari method came out, Marie Kondo, and her thing was how everything had to spark joy, etc., etc. And so a lot of people got on that train, and so they went on that train and they got rid of a lot of stuff. Well, there's been a bit of a backlash of something called maximalism, which is basically you have as much stuff as you can cram in your house. Now, the idea is that it still needs to be a functioning home and there has to be safety and things like that. But instead of worrying about getting rid of things, you bring in things that make you happy. So it doesn't mean necessarily that you're just going to go and buy 8 million pairs of shoes. But that there are some things that if it makes you happy, you go ahead and you get it. You don't worry about it as long as you have a place to display it. So I was a little nervous when I read this article because I wasn't sure which way they were going. And basically, this man, John Ficarra, was talking about how he wound up getting a bunch of stuff willed to him. And when his daughter moved out, she left all of her stuff behind. And so he had all of this stuff in his house. And he finally said, I'm done. He decluttered a whole bunch of stuff. And he was feeling pretty good about it. But when he was on eBay to sell items, he saw other things that he wanted. He didn't need them, but he wanted them. So he got them. So he's got stuff flowing out and stuff flowing back in at the same time. And some of these were pretty funny. A one-of-a-kind wood carving with the body of a turkey but the head of Elvis Presley. Astoundingly, I was the only bidder. The wax mold of a dinosaur from the World's Fair. The arrow from a weather vane, and painting an old whaling ship and stuff like this. And so he's got flow both directions, mostly out, which was good. And he does list here that he does have 3 rules. So basically, he has gone from a clutterer to a collector. And so I explain this all the time in lectures that I give, that a lot of times people, even people that are hoarding, which means they've got tons, right? They think of themselves as collectors. But when you are a collector, you're going to have rules for your collection. You're going to understand the value of the items that you have. You'll be willing to get rid of inferior items for higher quality items, or more expensive, depending on what the things are. And you will display and show off your collection. So, for example, Jay Leno has, I think, the last time I saw was almost 200 cars. Like, sit-in and drive-away cars, not little Matchbox cars. But he has this giant airplane hangar that he stores them in. They all have their own spot. They all are highly well maintained. There's a full-time mechanic who takes them and runs them so that they don't get all gunked up from just sitting there. He takes news crews and documentary people and all kinds of people through all the time, and he shows them off. And he actually rebuilds the cars. So I was watching one episode where he had just the frame of an old pickup truck, and he was going to rebuild the whole truck. That's a collector. Even though there's a ton of pieces and it takes up a huge amount of space, it's a collection. It starts to be clutter when you have it stored in places you can't access easily. So if your fine china is under the guest bed, or in the garage, or in the attic, not so much collection as clutter. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So he actually has his rules, and I'll actually tell you how my rules for collecting, for me, my stuff in my house. But number 1 was limit purchases to what you can display and or use. Nothing goes in the attic or basement. That's a really good first rule. Don't buy anything on a whim. You should really love what you're considering or let it pass. So this is kind of the Sparks Joy concept. So if there's something that you're like, that is just amazing. I know how I'll use it. I know where I'll store it. I've got the space, I have a use for it. It's part of a grouping, whatever it is. That's cool. If it's just like, oh, that's kind of neat, and that's all there's to it, save your money. Okay? And the number 3, run any questionable purchases past by an outside counsel, in his case, his daughter. He says, it's only fair that she gets a vote since technically I'm spending her inheritance. It's always a good idea to run it past an independent person. In this case as well, I would say running it past the daughter is great because she may wind up inheriting this thing later, and if she's really disgusted by it, why force her to deal with it? So I collect dragons. Now, I had to have rules for my dragons, because if I took my credit card to the mall, I could fill my house tonight, right? So my first rule is that I am not allowed to buy myself dragons. No matter how cool the t-shirt, the puzzle, the game, the cross-stitch pattern, whatever it is, I cannot buy it. I can ask for it for a gift, But I generally don't. The only things I've asked for as gifts were cross-stitch patterns, because I did cross-stitch for a while, and I was doing a lot that were like dragons and wizards. But all the rest of my dragons have been gifts. And so I have a curio cabinet in my front room. And all of the statuary type dragons have to fit in there. When it comes to things that hang on the wall, no more than one dragon piece per wall, except for a small wall that I have that have the cross-stitch things that I did. They're all grouped together because they're all on black canvas, so they're all thematically the same. But any of the others, no more than one per wall. And t-shirts all have to fit in one stack in my dresser. That's it. So if I get something new in and it doesn't fit, something older has to go. The cool thing about this is because I'm not just buying what's easily visible at the mall, the dragon standing on the crystal holding the sphere, crystal ball, while he stands on, jade or purple amethyst or anything like that, rough hewn type things. I have gotten the coolest dragons. I have a set of poker playing dragons. There's also a bar and a maid who holds up a tray full of flaming drinks, and there's some that are playing darts. It's basically an entire bar scene. I have fire-breathing dragons because they're lamps. I have smoke-breathing dragons because they're teapots. I have dragons that you're supposed to put under your downspout so that it shoots water out. I have so many cool dragons. But they're all in the curio cabinet, and when it gets too full, I have to purge some out. So that's how I did my collection, so that it stays a collection. It's very easy for things to get completely out of control. For quilters, fabric, rulers, other tools, thread, very easy to get out of control. So just on a decluttering concept, keeping in mind and having some rules is a really good thing. But for any part of the house, having rules for the things that you display or the things that you allow to come in is very good. So I was watching a science show on TV, and it was on the universe. And basically, it said that, and I'm kind of extrapolating it here, but the universe needs a vacuum in order to create space for new things to happen. So in order to create new relationships, in order to create new hobbies, in order to create new opportunities, we need space. And we get that by creating a vacuum. Having more stuff leaving than staying gives us more room to live our lives in. So I'd like you to take that concept with you as well as we go into 2023. I know most of you aren't going to see this until 2023 or after, but it's a good thing for any time that you see it to remember the universe needs space, and so do you. If you have stuck it all the way out here till the end, thank you very much. I am so looking forward to the upcoming year. I have a whole bunch of ideas that I'm hoping that we'll be able to work on together. And if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe. If you hit the bell, you'll get a notification when I'm on. I do tend to start the live stream about 15 minutes in advance, so you get the alert on your phone, and then that gives you time to go ahead and get a cup of coffee or tea, get through the restroom, grab a snack, do whatever it is you want to do prior to sitting down and joining us here. It is the first and third Wednesday of every month that's the live stream. I am hoping, as always, to have some editing time available in the next few months so that I can start putting out more regular content that would be shorter form. But I do want to keep these live streams because I would really love it if we can get the chat going to a point where we can be sharing ideas and sharing stories and things like that, and make this a very friendly and open place for people to come and participate. So it's 1 minute till. So if I have not seen you or will not see you, please have a very happy holiday season. Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, and a wonderful new year. May all good things come to you in 2023. Take care, and I will see you January 4th. Okay? Bye-bye.